Right now, inside your body, an important decision is being made. Not at the level of willpower, not at the level of motivation, but at the level of hormones. The body is choosing between two completely different modes. One is storing energy. The other is burning energy. And what surprises many people is that this decision does not depend on how much you eat during the day, but on when you eat. You can train a lot. Eat very little. But if the biological signals come at the wrong time, the body will still prioritize storing fat. On the other hand, some people eat more than you, yet still lose fat, because their body receives the metabolic signal at the right time. In physiology, the body does not operate based on emotional logic. It operates based on signals, and the strongest signal controlling fat storage or fat burning is not calories, but hormones, especially insulin. Every time you eat, insulin rises. When insulin rises, the body receives the message that energy is abundant, and the number one priority is storage. When insulin drops for a long enough period, the body receives the opposite message, that no food is coming in, and it begins to open stored reserves. This is when fat is mobilized. This is when metabolism changes. And this is also the state that most people today almost never reach. If we look back at human evolution, our bodies were not designed to eat continuously from morning to night. For most of history, food did not appear on a fixed schedule. Some days there was food. Some days there was not. Sometimes there was plenty. Sometimes there was hunger. This cycle is what shaped the metabolic system we carry today. But in modern life, that cycle has almost disappeared. Breakfast right after waking up. Coffee with sugar. A mid-morning snack. Lunch, an afternoon snack, dinner, and then something else before sleep. From a biological perspective, this creates a very specific state. The body is always in fed mode, but rarely in fasting mode. And when the body never enters the fasting state, insulin almost never drops low enough, long enough, to activate fat burning. This is why many people feel that they do everything right, but still cannot lose visceral fat. They reduce calories. They exercise. They try hard. But they do not change the metabolic signal. And when the signal does not change, the body does not change. In biology, the body does not care whether you are trying or not. It only responds to the hormonal environment it receives. There is one interesting detail that few people notice. If the body truly needed food every few hours to function, we would have to wake up in the middle of the night to eat. But that does not happen. During sleep, you are fasting for many hours. And that period is when the body begins to shift from using new energy to using stored energy. The problem is that in modern life, this natural fasting window is often shortened, so much that the body does not have time to switch into fat-burning mode before you eat again. When that repeats every day, storage gradually exceeds usage, and visceral fat begins to increase, even if you do not feel like you eat too much. To understand why fasting can change metabolism so strongly, we need to look deeper into how the body manages energy over time. Because fasting is not a single state. It is a sequence of biological transitions. And each stage activates a different system. When you understand this timeline, you will understand why some people fast for 12 hours and feel nothing. But at 16 hours, the body begins to change. And with longer fasting, mechanisms that you may not have activated for many years finally begin to work. Part 1. Insulin is the fat storage switch, not calories. To understand why meal timing can be more important than calorie count in many cases, we have to look at how the body manages energy at the biological level, not at the level of ordinary thinking. The body does not count calories the way we imagine. It does not look at the total amount of food in a day and then decide whether to gain or lose fat. It responds to hormonal signals, and the most important hormone in this process is insulin. Insulin is often described as the hormone that controls blood sugar. But in energy metabolism, its role is much bigger. Insulin is the storage signal. When insulin rises, the body receives the message that energy is available in the environment. And the priority at that moment is not burning, but storing. Glucose from food will be moved into cells to be used immediately, and the excess will be converted into glycogen in the liver and muscles. But the amount of glycogen the body can store is very limited. When glycogen stores are nearly full, the extra energy will be converted into fat. This is not a mistake of the body. This is a survival mechanism designed through millions of years of evolution. The problem is not whether the body stores fat. The problem is whether the body has the opportunity to use the fat that has been stored. When insulin remains high, the enzymes responsible for releasing fat are suppressed. This means that even if there is a large amount of stored energy in the body, it cannot be used. From a biological perspective, this is a very unusual state. Energy exists, but cannot be used because the hormonal signal says there is no need yet. This explains a paradox that many people experience. They eat less, but still struggle to lose fat, not because they lack discipline, but because their body has not received the signal to switch into stored energy mode. If every meal raises insulin and the meals are too close together, the body almost never reaches a low insulin period long enough to open the fat stores. When viewed this way, the issue is no longer about eating more or less, but about whether the time between meals is long enough for the body to change state. To understand this more clearly, we need to look at the order in which the body uses energy. After eating, the body always uses new energy first. When food has just entered the system, blood glucose rises. Insulin rises with it, and cells prioritize using this energy source. If there is excess, the body stores it as glycogen. Only when glycogen begins to decrease does the body switch to using fat. This means that fat burning is not the default state. It is a state that happens when the body no longer has easily available energy. In modern life, many people never reach this step, not because they eat too much in one meal, but because they eat too often. Each time you eat again, even a small amount, insulin rises again, and the transition to fat burning stops. When this repeats from morning to night, day after day, the body is kept in storage mode almost constantly. From the outside, it may look like slow metabolism, but in reality, it is simply the result of repeated biological signals. The important point here is that the body is not resisting fat loss. It is only doing exactly what it was programmed to do. When food is frequent, it stores. When there is no food for a long enough period, it uses reserves. That is why, to understand why fasting can change metabolism so strongly, we need to look at what actually happens over time after you stop eating. Not after 1 hour, not after 2 hours, but through clear biological stages. And this timeline is the key to explaining why some people fast for 12 hours and notice nothing. But at 16 hours, the body begins to burn fat. And with longer fasting, mechanisms that normally almost never activate finally start working. Part 2, the fasting timeline. When the body actually starts burning fat. To understand why fasting can change metabolism so strongly, we need to look at the process over time, not by feeling. Many people think that skipping one meal will immediately make the body start burning fat. But physiology does not work that simply. The body shifts state in very clear stages, and each stage is controlled by different hormones, enzymes, and energy signals. If you do not go far enough along this timeline, the body is still in storage mode. Even if you think you are fasting, in the first few hours after eating, the body is still in what is called the fed state. At this time, insulin is still high. Blood glucose is still being processed, and cells prioritize using the new energy coming in. Some energy is used immediately, and the rest is stored in the liver and muscles as glycogen. In this stage, fat burning is almost turned off. Not because the body does not want to burn fat, but because there is no reason to. When energy is abundant in the blood, the body always uses the easiest source first. After about 8 to 12 hours, the body begins to move into the post-absorptive state, meaning most of the energy from the previous meal has been processed. Insulin begins to drop, and another hormone rises, which is glucagon. If insulin is the storage signal, glucagon is the release signal. Under the effect of glucagon, the liver starts breaking down glycogen to keep blood sugar stable. This is the stage where the body begins to use stored energy. But it is still not true fat burning yet. It is like using the cash in your wallet before opening the safe. When the time without food becomes longer, usually around 12 to 16 hours, glycogen levels begin to drop significantly. At this point, insulin is low enough for fat cells to receive the signal to release energy. Fatty acids enter the bloodstream, travel to the muscles and liver, and are burned in the mitochondria to produce ATP. This is the moment when the body truly enters the fat-burning state. This process is sometimes called the metabolic switch, meaning the switch from using new energy to using stored energy. The important point is that this switch does not turn on immediately after you stop eating, but only when insulin is low enough and glycogen is reduced enough. If you eat again too soon, the switch turns off before the transition is complete. When fasting continues longer, the body begins to produce ketones from fatty acids. Ketones are an alternative fuel for the brain when glucose is no longer abundant. This is a very special feature of humans, because the brain consumes a large amount of energy but cannot directly use fatty acids. When ketones appear, the body enters a state of metabolic flexibility, meaning it can use both glucose and fat without depending completely on either one. People who eat constantly often lose this flexibility. So after only a few hours without food, they feel tired, hungry, and unable to focus. Not because they lack energy, but because the body is not used to using stored energy. If fasting continues longer, around 18 to 24 hours, another change occurs. Growth hormone begins to increase noticeably. This may sound opposite to what many people believe, because many think fasting causes muscle loss. But in reality, when insulin is low and growth hormone rises, the body tends to preserve muscle tissue and prioritize using fat for energy. This is a protective mechanism that existed when humans had to live in environments where food was scarce. If every time food was unavailable, the body lost muscle, the human species would not have survived. When fasting extends even further, the body activates systems that are rarely used during constant eating. One of the most important systems is the internal cleanup and recycling process inside cells. Damaged proteins, faulty structures, and inefficient mitochondria begin to be broken down and reused. This process does not happen immediately. but increases gradually as fasting continues. That is why there is a big difference between fasting 12 hours, 16 hours, or 24 hours. Even though the difference may seem small from the outside, the important point to understand is that the body does not switch into fat-burning mode just because you want it to. It only switches when biological signals allow it. And in modern life, many people never go far enough along this timeline to activate the mechanisms the body was designed to use. This leads to a common misunderstanding. People think fasting is only a way to eat less, but at the biological level, fasting does not just change the amount of energy, it changes the entire operating mode of the body. And this change of mode is the real reason why fasting can affect visceral fat, insulin resistance, and even the aging process. Part 3, autophagy. When the body shifts from growth to repair. Up to this point, we have only talked about fat burning. But fasting does not only affect the amount of fat in the body. When the period without food becomes long enough, the body begins to activate a completely different mode of operation. No longer focused on storing or using energy, but shifting toward repair. This is the stage that many modern studies are most interested in, because it is directly related to aging, metabolic disease, and cellular durability. The central mechanism of this stage is called autophagy, a process in which the body breaks down damaged components in order to reuse them. In the constantly fed state, the body always prioritizes growth when food is available, especially when insulin is high. Biological signals promote building new tissue, synthesizing new proteins, and creating new structures inside the cell. This is necessary when energy is abundant. But it also has a downside. When the body focuses only on building, the cleanup process is reduced. Over time, misfolded proteins, inefficient mitochondria, and cellular fragments that no longer function properly begin to accumulate. These do not cause problems immediately, but if they build up over many years, they reduce cellular efficiency and contribute to the aging process. When fasting lasts long enough and insulin drops, the body changes priority. Instead of continuing to build, it shifts to maintenance. Autophagy is activated when growth signals decrease, especially when the mTOR pathway is suppressed. At this point, the cell begins to inspect itself. Misfolded proteins are broken down into amino acids. Inefficient mitochondria are removed and replaced with newer, more efficient ones. Cellular debris, virus, bacteria, and structures that are no longer needed are also broken down and reused as raw material. This process acts like an internal recycling system, helping the cell maintain quality instead of only increasing quantity. The important point is that autophagy does not turn on the moment you stop eating. It increases gradually with time spent fasting. In the first hours, the body only lowers insulin and uses glycogen. After that, it shifts to fat burning. And only when the low insulin state lasts long enough does the repair mechanism increase significantly. This is why fasting 12 hours and fasting 24 hours are not the same. Even though the difference may feel like just one missed meal, at the biological level, they are completely different states. One of the reasons fasting is studied so much in aging research is that autophagy is linked to lifespan in many species. When energy is always abundant, the body prioritizes reproduction and growth. When energy is limited for a period of time, the body shifts toward preservation and repair. Many animal studies show that when cycles of eating and fasting are maintained, signs of aging appear more slowly. Cellular function remains more stable, and blood sugar control improves. This does not mean fasting is a miracle method, but it shows that the body was designed to function in a rhythm that includes periods of eating and periods without food. Another effect, often seen when fasting lasts long enough, is increased insulin sensitivity. When insulin stays high continuously, cells gradually respond less to the signal, and the body has to release more insulin to achieve the same effect. This is the mechanism that leads to insulin resistance. When the period without eating becomes long enough, insulin stays low for many hours. Receptors have a chance to rest and become sensitive again. When eating resumes, the body handles glucose more efficiently. This explains why many people improve blood sugar not only by eating less, but by reducing how often they eat. What needs to be clearly understood is that the goal of fasting is not to fast as long as possible. The goal is to give the body enough time to enter a state that it almost never reaches in modern life. If food is always available, the body stays in growth mode. If there is a long enough period without eating, the body can shift into repair mode. And it is the alternation between these two modes that the human metabolic system was designed for. Once this is understood, the next question is no longer whether fasting is good or not, but how long the fast should be for the body to actually pass through these metabolic stages, because each fasting duration activates a different level of change, and not everyone needs the same level. This is why, in practice, there are many different types of fasting, from short daily fasting to longer fasts that create stronger metabolic signals. And to choose correctly, each type needs to be viewed from a biological perspective, not as a trend. Part 4: different types of fasting, and when the body needs a stronger signal. Once we understand that the body changes state based on the duration of fasting, the next question is no longer whether to fast, but how long is enough? This is where many people misunderstand. They think there is only one correct way to fast, or the opposite. They try to extend the fasting period as long as possible. But in physiology, the body does not need a fixed duration. It needs a signal that matches its current metabolic state. A person with good metabolic flexibility may only need a short fast to activate fat burning, while someone with chronically high insulin may need a longer fasting window before the body truly changes. The most common type of fasting today is time-restricted eating, often described as 16 hours fasting and 8 hours eating. For many people, simply extending the non-eating period to about 14 to 16 hours is enough for insulin to drop, glycogen to begin to deplete, and the body to enter the fat-burning phase. The key of this method is not eating less, but giving the body a daily period long enough to switch into stored energy mode. When this happens consistently, metabolism becomes more stable, blood sugar fluctuates less, and visceral fat tends to decrease without needing large changes in total food intake. However, the body adapts very quickly. When a signal repeats for a long time, it becomes normal. This is why many people lose weight well at the beginning. But after a while, progress slows, even though they keep the same routine. From a biological perspective, this is not unusual. When energy intake decreases, the body tends to conserve energy to protect its reserves. Metabolic rate slows. Hunger increases, and fat loss becomes slower. At that point, if further change is needed, the signal must change. One way to make the signal stronger is to extend the fasting period. A stronger form of fasting is eating only one meal a day. When the fasting window extends beyond 20 hours, insulin stays low for most of the day, and the body remains in fat-burning mode longer. For people with insulin resistance or long-term fat accumulation, this can produce more noticeable changes than a 16-hour fast. But this does not mean everyone needs to do it. For someone with healthy metabolism, one meal a day may reduce energy too much or be difficult to sustain. In biology, effectiveness does not come from extremes. but from the right signal at the right time. An even stronger level of fasting is extended fasting lasting longer than 1 day. When the period without food goes beyond 24 hours, glycogen is almost completely depleted. Insulin remains low for a prolonged time, and the body is forced to use fat as the primary energy source. At the same time, repair mechanisms such as autophagy increase more clearly compared to shorter fasts. This is why longer fasts are sometimes used to break a plateau, meaning when the body has adapted to the previous signal and no longer changes. However, in most cases, long fasting periods do not need to be done frequently. They act more like a strong reset to bring metabolism back to a flexible state, after which shorter fasting windows can be used for maintenance. The most important point to understand is that fasting is not a single method, but a tool to adjust biological signals. If the signal is too weak, the body does not change. If the signal is too strong and continuous, the body adapts by conserving energy. Therefore, effectiveness does not come from fasting the longest, but from creating a cycle with periods of eating and periods without food, long enough for the body to alternate between growth mode and stored energy mode. When this cycle is restored, many metabolic problems begin to regulate themselves without excessive force. And at this point, there is something even more important than fat loss or weight loss. When the body regains the ability to switch flexibly between energy sources, many other systems become more stable, from blood sugar to hormones to daily energy levels. This leads to a surprising conclusion. Fasting is not a way to fight the body. It is a way to return the body to the state it was originally designed to function in. And from this perspective, the problem of modern life may not be that we eat too much, but that we rarely allow the body to go long enough without eating for it to regulate itself. Part 5. The biological conclusion: fasting is not a new method, but the body's natural rhythm. When the entire process is viewed from a biological perspective, it becomes clear that the problem of modern metabolism is not that humans lack discipline, but that the living environment has changed too quickly compared to the way the body was designed. For most of evolutionary history, food did not appear continuously. Sometimes there was food. Sometimes there was not. This fluctuation forced the body to develop the ability to both store and use energy flexibly. When food was available, the body stored energy in case of shortage. When food was not available, the body opened its reserves to maintain function. This cycle was not a method, but a natural state. In modern life, that cycle has almost disappeared. Food is always available. Eating time extends from morning to night, and the period without food is shortened so much that the body rarely switches into stored energy mode. When insulin stays high for most of the day, the body receives the signal that energy is always abundant, and therefore prioritizes storage. This does not cause problems immediately, but when repeated for many years, the balance between storage and usage breaks down. Visceral fat gradually increases. Insulin sensitivity gradually decreases, and the body becomes more dependent on new energy instead of using the energy it already has. Fasting, when understood correctly, is not a special technique for weight loss. It is simply a way to restore the missing half of metabolism. When the period without eating is long enough, insulin drops, glycogen is used, fat begins to be mobilized, and repair mechanisms inside the cell are activated. This does not happen because the body is forced, but because the body returns to the operating mode it was originally built for. When the cycle of eating and fasting becomes balanced, many functions begin to regulate themselves without complicated intervention. Blood sugar becomes more stable, daily energy fluctuates less, hunger decreases, and fat accumulation slows down. An important point to understand is that fasting does not replace nutrition, sleep, or physical activity. If food quality is poor, if sleep is insufficient, or if the body is constantly under stress, then fasting alone will not solve everything. But when the basic factors are stable, restoring a daily period without eating can create changes much greater than simply reducing calories. The reason is that it directly affects hormonal signals, the way the body decides whether to use or store energy, rather than just changing numbers on paper. What is interesting is that once this mechanism is understood, the way we look at fat loss also changes. Instead of thinking that we must always eat less and exercise more, we begin to look at biological rhythm. The body does not need to be forced all the time. It needs periods when it can use what it already has. When those periods appear regularly, metabolism becomes more flexible, and weight control becomes more natural, not because the body works harder, but because it is finally allowed to function the way it was designed to. Therefore, the important question is not whether fasting is the best method or not. The question is whether the body is receiving enough time to enter the state it was built to reach. If the answer is no, then restoring a daily fasting window, even if it is only a few hours longer than before, can make a significant difference. Sometimes the strongest change in biology does not come from adding something new, but from removing a habit that feels normal today but never existed in the environment where the human body evolved. And in this case, that habit is constant eating.